Hello class, in this video, I'm going to show you how to read the data from a file instead of reading data from the keyboard like what you have been doing. So let's go ahead and get started. The easiest way to learn how to read the data from a file is to look at the code. So let's take a look at this code. This is an example from Zybook. And you notice that from the beginning on line number 2, um, there is an include statement that's a include f stream. And basically, we're going to use this library for reading from the input file. And later on in another video, you will learn how to output to a file. First of all, you need to include this fs stream, stand for file stream. And then in your program, you need to declare a file input stream variable. And the data type is if stream, which stands for input file stream. And the variable name is infs, which stands for input files system. And in this example, we're going to use a few variables to store the data that we read from this file. The variables are restaurant name, username, user rating sum, or stand for the sum of all user rating, and also the rating count. So the goal of this program is to read the input from this file from this is what we call a text file, which means that you can open this file in a text editor like code blocks, like what I'm using. And first of all, let me show you what the input file look like, and then we will look at the code, how the code process the data from this input file. The input file is called review.txt. So you see the file extension is txt, which stands for text. The first line of this file contains the restaurant name, and followed by a blank, and then followed by the user ID. And after user is a rating of the user ID give this restaurant. So this is like, let's say this is the data from Yep, which the user give the rating to this restaurant. And after the rating, followed by a blank line, and then another user ID, and then the rating and blank line, user ID, and rating. So basically, that's the file data. And when there is no more user rating, you see that there is a blank line. So there's nothing after that. So let's switch back to the code, how we read this input file. So instead of typing this information from the keyboard, we read the data from this text file. So you don't have to type this information from the keyboard. It saves a lot of typing. So let's look at the C++ code, how we read the data from that text file. So you need the if stream variable name. In fs is my variable name, input file system. And before you can read the data from this file, you have to open the file. You say open, and then you specify the file name. So my file name is reviews.txt. And this file is currently located in my current working directory, which is the same directory as my C++ file. If the file resides in a different directory, you have to specify the path in this double quote. So to make it easy for learning purpose, I assume that the input file is in the same directory with my C++ file, and then you can assume the same thing, you can do the same thing. This if statement check to see if the file can be opened or not. Let's say if this file doesn't exist, that means I don't have the file that has that name in my current directory, then I cannot read the data. So I do cout or output an error message that could not open the file. And I return from the main program, which basically stop executing, terminate my main program. And you will notice that I return with the return code of 1 because main return an integer, return code to the operating system, and 0 means success, and any other return code means failure. That means there is something wrong with the program. I could not open the file. So in this case, let's say reviews the text exists and it is in my current directory. Let's see how we read from that file. I'm using getLine and I say getLine from this file. This is what we call the file handle. It's not really the file name because the file name is specified in here. Then after that, you don't need to use a file name anymore. You're using this input file stream variable, which is what we call the file handle. And that's my variable name. So getLine, do you remember how getLine read from the keyboard? In order to read from the keyboard, you say getLine in and followed by a string, right? In this case, instead of say cin, you specify the file handle, which is the input file stream variable. So it looks really similar to getLine cin, and actually it's almost the same. And then we say read from this file a string restaurant name. A string, so we read the entire line, then we store into this variable restaurant name. So let me switch back to the input file. That's the first line in this file. Let me make this, zoom this in, make this bigger, make it easy to see. So we are reading this line, that's the restaurant name. And then we do cout restaurant name, so we can see what the restaurant name is. And then we do cout the line, separate the restaurant name. And then there are several users names and rating in this file. So we need a while loop to read this file until we hit the end of file. We don't know how many user reviews exist in this file. So the while loop must specify a condition. If this condition is true, that means EOF. If EOF is true, mean end of file, then we we terminate the while loop. So we use the not condition here. So we say while not end of file, and this is an end operand, which means that it requires the first operand must be true and the second operand must be true for the whole conditions to be true for the loop to continue. And in fs that good, that means that we can read the data. Sometimes the file exists, but we may have error when we try to read the data. It means we may not have the permission to read the data, or there is some problem with the file is corrupted, we cannot read from the file. So we only execute this while loop when there is data in the file, we're not the end of the file, and we can read the data successfully. So you see, we say fs, in fs. So this is really similar to the way you specify how you read from cin or console input. In cin, you say cin and then variable name, right? User name. So this look exactly the same. So let me save this file. But instead of getting data from the keyboard, you're getting data from this file. But the syntax is exactly the same. So after we read the restaurant name, we say we're gonna read the username. And there's a blank line, so that is not username. The username must not be blank. So that's what we read. And then after we read the username, we read the user rating. That's the integer you see in the next line. That's the rating. So we read the username, read the rating, and if we can read this information successfully, username and rating, then we continue to do see out the username and the rating. So this check to make sure that we can read the data successfully into username and rating. So the condition that we check is not fail. Not fail means it's good, right? And if we can get the data, the username and the rating successfully, we print, see out, we print to the screen, username and rating, and terminate that with an end line. You see that we have an end line, end line here, that terminate that line. Then we do a see out end line by itself. That means it will print a blank line. And then we increment the rating sum or the sum upon rating by the user rating. We do this so that we will need to calculate the average rating after we finish reading the data file. And we also keep track of how many rating we have by increment the rating count by 1. You notice that rating count is initialized to 0 before the loop, and the sum is also initialized to 0 before the loop. So both of these are 0. Therefore, we can increment them by adding user rating to the sum and increment count by 1. And we keep reading this line by line for both username and rating until we reach the end of the file, which is EOF is 2. So this is an end condition. So if we hit end of file, this flag is 2, then not EOF is false. This is a AND condition, so only one operand is false that caused the entire condition to be false. So when we hit the end of the file, this is false. It caused a loop to terminate. And if we go back over here, it just keep reading user ID, username and rating, username, rating until it hit the end of file, like right here. That's where we hit the end of file and the while loop condition is false. We need to exit the while loop. After we exit the while loop, we print the average rating. And we print the average rating by taking the sum of all the rating divided by the user rating. And you notice that we put the data type in front of this variable name. User rating sum is declared as an integer. User rating sum is an integer because the rating is an integer, right? So if you take an integer and you divide by integer, what do you get? You get an integer. And in order to calculate the average, it cannot be an integer. Even though you take an integer, divide by an integer, you get an integer that's not correct. So in order to get a double result, which makes the average rating correct, we have to do something called casting. Casting means take this variable as an integer and convert it to double. Why? Because in an expression that involve mixed data type between double and integer, the result will be double. The result will be the higher precision data type, which is double. So we want to see the average rating is a double data type. That's why we need to do this. Another way to do this is you declare average variable, and then also convert one of these to double like these, and then assign to a double variable and do cout. Um, so if everything's work good, we do that. If we exit the loop and the condition that exit the loop was we got some problem because uh, INFS good is false, then we say, oops, we exit the loop because we encounter an error. Then we also print this if statement say if not end of file. That means we did not return the file, but we exit the loop. Then we print error reading the review file and exit the program. And then at the end, you need to close the file because you open it over here. So um, in C++ or in general, in any language, when you open a file for input or output, you need to close that file to make sure the data is not corrupted and make sure the operating system does not keep track of the file is still open when you already finished reading. So let's run this code so you see what the output looks like. All right, so that's the data you see. This is the restaurant name, right? And let me move this window to the side to make this so that the code on one side, the output on the other side to make it easy to compare where the output comes from. All right, so the first line in the input file is the restaurant name. That's what you see right here. And that line comes from here. You do get line, and inside of cin, you specify the input file variable name, and then restaurant name. That's what we read. We read from the file. You notice that when I run this program, I didn't type any input because the data comes from a file, not from the keyboard. And the next line, line 28, print that line with all hyphen, right? And then we go to the loop, we read the username, and then we make sure we were able to read the username and the rating before we do output. Username, that's the username. This is the username, the first username, and the rating. If you look at the input file, that's the first username and then the rating. And follow by playing, and then you should see that this is the second username. That's the second username and then the rating, and so on. So we keep going until we hit the end of the file. Now you notice that you don't have to worry about how do you know the end of the file. The operating system and input file stream keep track of where it is when it reads the file. So there is something that the file system keep track of, or the input file keep track of, something called cursor. Cursor means it keeps track of where it is in terms of reading the file, and so it knows where the end of the file is. So if we look at the output file again, this is the last user ID we read. Friday day, 9/12, and then the rating. You see the username right here? That's the last username and rating we read. And then we print the line, and that's this line. And then we also calculate the average rating by convert this user rating into double before we divide, so that we will get this decimal places. Otherwise, if you don't do the conversion, it will just say 3, which is not correct. And let's see, let's see what happens if you try to read a file that doesn't exist. So I'm gonna comment out this line and uncomment this line, which I wrote in there before, and save this file. So I don't have this file. Mine review the text. So the program should print this error message and exit. Let's run this. You will see that it's a could not open file reviews or type because I changed the file name. So I don't have a file called my review the text. So actually I should change this error message. Well, yeah, that error message is correct. This is the wrong file name. That file doesn't exist. And it's a process return one. That's the return value I put in right here. All right, so that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching.